My name is Camille St. Ange, and I will help facilitate today's webinar in partnership with Lisa Keene. You'll see Lisa's handle on the control panel listed as AQ Outreach. Before we begin our presentation, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. All lines are muted upon entry, and you are in a listen-only mode. Our webinar is being recorded today and will be available online at ecy.wa.gov. If you're having technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat box. We do have a large number of people registered for today's presentation, about 250 people. To ensure everyone has the opportunity to ask questions, we will be collecting questions in our chat box. If you have a question about something we present, please submit your question through the chat feature. We will save the chat feature transcripts. We'll use those questions submitted to develop a themed FAQ that will be posted on our website. You can also submit your questions throughout the presentation. Should you come up with a question after the webinar is over, you can also email us at vwsettlement@ecy.wa.gov, and that's displayed on your screen now. And I'll post that again at the end of our presentation. If you haven't found the chat feature, you can look on the control panel and you'll see a little bubble that looks like a thought bubble, and that's your chat feature. And click on that, and that will give you the opportunity to type a message to us. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Stu Clark, Program Manager for Ecology's Air Quality Program.
Thank you, Camille. As mentioned, I'm Stu Clark, Program Manager for the Department of Ecology's Air Quality Program. I'd like to begin by providing you with some background on the issue, an overview of the elements and the status of the settlements with Volkswagen for its violations of federal emission standards. As you can see on this slide, the case has been moving through the legal system since EPA issued their first notice of violation to Volkswagen back in September 2015 for violating the Federal Clean Air Act. In January 2016, the U.S. Department of Justice filed a complaint on behalf of EPA against Volkswagen for alleged violations of the Clean Air Act. Volkswagen has admitted they installed illegal software on 2-liter and 3-liter diesel engines that was designed to cheat emissions tests. The software cheated emissions tests by only turning on the vehicle's emission control systems when the car was being tested. Volkswagen and EPA have reached settlements on the 2-liter and 3-liter vehicles. We will be focusing on those settlements in our discussion today. Across the nation, about 590,000 vehicles are affected or were sold in the 2- and 3-liter categories. We estimate that Washington has about 22,000 of these vehicles registered in our state. If you're not familiar, there are several vehicle models that are affected. You'll notice that several of the vehicles are not Volkswagen models. For clarification, the federal action was taken against Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, and the Volkswagen Group of America, collectively known as Volkswagen. If you want to refer to these models, you can find all of them listed on our website. By violating the Federal Clean Air Act in the way that Volkswagen did, people across the nation were exposed to increased levels of nitrogen oxides from its diesel vehicles. In addition to direct exposure to nitrogen oxide pollution, the excess pollution from these vehicles contributes to increased levels of ground-level ozone and fine particulate matter. Exposure to these pollutants has been linked with a range of serious health effects, including increased asthma attacks and other respiratory illnesses that can be serious enough to send people to the hospital. Children, the elderly, and people with pre-existing respiratory disease are particularly at risk for adverse health effects from these pollutants. Now I'd like to walk you through the important elements of the consent decrees. Please remember that if you have a question, you can submit it through the chat feature, and we will be posting answers to those questions on our frequently asked questions portion of our website. It's also important to understand that 2 consent decrees have been filed with the federal court that define VW's obligations and set bounds on use for the settlement monies. As detailed in the settlement, Volkswagen has agreed to provide consumer relief to owners of Volkswagen vehicles that failed federal emission standards, invest in and develop zero-emission vehicle infrastructure. When I say zero-emission vehicles, think electric cars, and also provide mitigation funds to states and tribes to offset the excess nitrogen oxide emissions from these vehicles. We worked with the Department of Licensing here in the state of Washington and determined that there are approximately 22,000 of the violating vehicles registered in Washington. Volkswagen has agreed to buy back vehicles, repair them, or provide cash settlements to the owners of these vehicles. These remedies are dependent on a variety of things, including the model year, engine size, and the pollution control equipment of the affected vehicle. As part of the 2-liter settlement, partial settlement, Volkswagen will invest $2 billion in zero-emission vehicle infrastructure over the next 10 years. Volkswagen must invest $800 million of that in California and the remaining $1.2 billion throughout the rest of the nation. Examples of zero-emission vehicle investment projects include electric vehicle charging stations at multi-unit dwellings, workplaces, and public sites. Also, electric vehicle fast charging stations that would be available to all vehicles using non-proprietary connectors, and brand-neutral education or public outreach that increases public awareness of zero-emission vehicles. The public will have an opportunity to provide or submit proposals on the type and locations of these zero-emission vehicle investments. Please visit electrifyamerica.com for more information and to provide and submit proposals to Volkswagen. We believe our state is a good market for Volkswagen to invest in. Compared to other states, Washingtonians have a high level of interest in and have purchased a fair number of electric vehicles. We also provide state tax incentives and other investments to help electric vehicles be a significant part of the vehicle fleet in the state of Washington. We also submitted comments on our own and proposal to Volkswagen jointly with the state of Oregon. We recommended zero-emission vehicle infrastructure projects to happen in our state. In addition to the $2 billion we just discussed, Volkswagen will pay an additional $3 billion into a trust fund over the next 3 years. Beneficiaries will use this $3 billion to pay for past, present, and future harm caused by the excess nitrogen oxide emissions released by the affected vehicles. All 50 states, Puerto Rico, the District of Columbia, and Indian tribes may elect to become beneficiaries of the trust funds. Beneficiaries will receive a specific amount of funds based on the number of affected vehicles registered within their geographic boundaries. Next, I'd like to share information about the trustee and funds to mitigate nitrogen oxide emissions. As outlined in the consent decree, a court-appointed trustee will be appointed, establish a trust that holds the money, and provide oversight of those trust funds. Once a trustee is established, Washington, along with the other states and tribes, can submit documents to become a beneficiary of the mitigation funds. We estimate the funds will be available to state and tribal beneficiaries about 6 months after the trust is established. After Washington is named as a beneficiary and submitted a mitigation plan, we can submit funding requests. The mitigation plan is a high-level roadmap for how each beneficiary plans to spend the money. Plans must be submitted to the trustee within 90 days of that beneficiary being approved. As noted on the slide, funds received should be spent within 10 years with limits on how much can be requested in year 1 and 2. As you might expect, the mitigation plan must meet requirements that are outlined in the consent decree. Plans must include an overall goal for the funds. We must also develop categories of eligible actions to achieve the goal. Other key requirements include consideration for communities that may have been disproportionately affected by the nitrogen oxides emitted and how to consider the input from the public on the state's plan. The consent decree also spells out uses for the mitigation fund. They can only be used for specific types of vehicles or equipment which are displayed on this slide. Eligible vehicles and equipment may be replaced or repowered with new diesel engines, alternate fueled engines such as compressed natural gas, propane, or hybrid engines, or all-electric engines. Heavy-duty and medium-duty electric vehicle equipment and repower replacement options can also include funding to help with cost of charging infrastructure. Additional details about eligible uses are in Appendix D of the 2-liter consent decree. You can find a link to the consent decree on our website. I want to take a moment to specifically mention tribal opportunities identified in the settlement. Just like states, federally recognized tribes are also eligible to become beneficiaries. The settlement specifically sets aside $49.6 million to be distributed nationally among eligible tribes. Please note that joint projects among beneficiaries between tribes and states or across tribes are permitted. The process for becoming a beneficiary is detailed in Appendix B of the settlement agreement, which, as I mentioned before, can be found on our website. The consent decree also describes a consultation process between the United States and tribes to determine how the funds will be allocated. Now let's take a more specific look at what this means to Washington. Under the 2-liter and 3-liter consent decrees, Ecology is eligible to receive $112.7 million to mitigate diesel pollution. A portion of the funds, $8 million, is contingent on final approval by the court of the 3-liter consent decree. Ecology, the Washington State Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office of Financial Management, and the Washington State Department of Transportation and our Attorney General's Office have been working together to review the requirements of the consent decrees and develop a framework and process for drafting a plan for Washington. The consent decrees also set parameters on what percentage of the money can be spent on zero-emission vehicle infrastructure and equipment. As shown on the slide, up to $16.9 million, 15% of the Washington total, can be spent on those types of projects. The Governor has directed Ecology to partner with our State Department of Transportation and Department of Commerce to invest the full 15% in zero-emission vehicle infrastructure for light-duty vehicles. The remaining $95.8 million could be directed toward any or all of the eligible uses of the funds we showed in a previous slide. At the beginning of the webinar, we shared a timeline of federal actions that have already occurred. This timeline is our projection for the next several months and is based on an estimated trust effective date sometime this month. So we expect in February that the trust becomes effective after the trustee has been named, that in the April-May time period, states would file for certification to become a beneficiary with the trustee. In the May-June time frame, we'd expect the trustee would identify those that filed certification forms, and objections may be filed on those certifications. Certification filers without objections would become beneficiaries in the May-June time frame, and those where objections have been filed, dispute resolution would begin in the June time frame. We expect that sometime between June and September, the beneficiaries would be submitting plans and may begin requesting funds from the trustee. Last and certainly not least, we'd like to share information about public outreach and how to connect with us as this process unfolds. In the coming weeks and months, we'll be meeting with representatives of local agencies, local governments, state governments, public interest groups, environmental justice communities, environmental groups, and the business community. We want to share our initial thinking and overarching principles for a draft plan in hopes to get feedback on our approach. We're also seeking feedback from the legislature and the rest of our state agencies. Once we have your thoughts, we will share a draft with you and the public for input. Now I'll turn this back over to Camille.
Thank you, Stu, and thank you for everyone who has participated in the webinar today. As a reminder, our webinar has been recorded and we'll make it available on our website. If you have a question about any of the content we shared, please submit your question in the chat feature. We will save a transcript of the chat feature to develop FAQs that we'll share on our website. We highly encourage you to sign up for our listserv on our website. We will send a message out through the listserv and let people know when the FAQs are up. If you think of a question after the webinar is over, you can also submit questions to vwsettlement@ecy.wa.gov. We're going to keep the webinar open for another 5 minutes in order for you to type questions into the chat feature. I'm going to put our lines on mute here at Ecology, and then I'll come back on and unmute and let us know when we're at about the 5-minute mark and let you finish typing up your questions. Okay, thank you. I'm glad you're all submitting questions. There has been a lot of activity. So right now we have contacts up on the screen. Brett Rood and Mike Boyer are our contacts for VW settlement questions. please take a moment and jot down their contact info if you like, but their information is also available on our website. You'll be redirected to our Volkswagen web pages when you log out, when you close out of the webinar today in your browser. And you can sign up for our VW listserv from the page you'll be directed to at the end of the presentation. That is the absolute best way to stay informed about the issue and to sign up, is to sign up for the listserv. So if you think of a question after the webinar, we have an email, vwsettlement@ecy.wa.gov. That is on our web pages as well, and you can submit a question there. Our intent is to take all the questions that were submitted today, and we'll theme them and post FAQs on our website. Our webinar was recorded as well, and we'll be posting that on our website. And we'll be sharing through our listserv when the information is available on our web pages. So I highly encourage you to sign up for the listserv. So I'm going to ask Lisa over here, do we still have questions coming in? Should we leave it open another moment, or have we got traffic slow down? Okay. So I'm going to give us 3 more minutes for you to finish up your questions, and then we're going to log off. I will come back on the line at that 3-minute mark and let you know that we're closing it out. So again, thank you, and I'm going to go back on mute. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you again. Please stay tuned on our website. This is an evolving project, and we'll be constantly putting new information up there. And I highly encourage you to sign up for our listserv. That's how we'll let you know when we have developments on public outreach. The team here at Ecology is the ones who will be managing outreach to the public and to all of the groups that Stu mentioned earlier. local governments, environmental groups, environmental justice, public interest, industry. One of the questions that came in is how many people were on our webinar today. We had about 240 people sign up, and we had 160 actually join our call today. And like I said, please visit our website. You'll be redirected when you log out of the webinar. On your browser will redirect you. And thank you for joining us today. We appreciate your time, and look for emails on our listserv for future developments.